Hey everybody, Greg on Contact Center KPI podcast, and today we have a special guest. We're going a little bit different than our normal guests. We have Jessica Lockhart here with us. She's the Business Intelligence Director at Jeffcoat Law Firm. She's been there 5 years, and she's also the President of Strategy and Innovation at Global Impact Financial Solutions. Jessica also is a current customer of Abstract, so it's kind of cool to have a customer on board with us here today. And we're not going to dive into typical KPIs. We're going to dive into is more of the strategy of how to get your team to buy in to adopting new technology, really in industries where compliance and privacy and security are very important, right? Like, as a law firm, right, you care about the security of the conversations, right? You have attorney-client privilege. You want to make sure all that's buttoned up. And so there's a lot of hesitation. And so Jessica's going to talk us through her experiences, kind of evangelizing the idea and then selecting a vendor and then going through and like getting folks to buy in. So Jessica, if I missed anything, please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Greg. I will say in my role, I do a lot of the vetting for AI solutions for us. And really the key for us in any tech is, can we help our clients with it? And so for us, it's easy to, start with how do we help our clients? And then it's fun to be able to work with, innovative vendors like Abstract to actually implement some new cool tech for our team. But I'm happy to talk about, what that process looks like and how you get your team bought in and using the product effectively.
Yeah. So let's kind of talk about, so let's start with before vendor selection, right? How do you go about, maybe you're the VP of compliance or you're in charge of quality assurance or you're in charge of training and enablement. How do you get CEO, COO to say, yes, go out and start looking for this? Because I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, is getting the permission to go out and start looking at tools. So how did you do that?
The first thing we did is, as a law firm, we work with an outside ethics counsel. And so for us, it was get a list from him of like actual federal guidelines that we need to adhere to, state guidelines we need to adhere to. So for us, we need SOC 2 compliance, we need HIPAA protections in place. And that really for us made the CEO more comfortable with the process because we already had the list of requirements that we needed to follow. And that means as soon as we go to a vendor, we can ask them before we even start the process, do you meet all of these requirements that we have to meet internally? And once we, have a yes from them, we can start building our short list of customers to vet essentially. But it's hugely important in law firms to work with your ethics counsels. So for us, as long as he was involved in setting the guidelines for us, our CEO was on board with us going out and vetting partners.
Interesting. So not positioning it as like, hey, this is what we're going to do from a metric standpoint, but like, hey, we've already done the homework to make sure that we're protected from a compliance, security, privacy setting. Like, we've gotten those guidelines. So that's interesting. Was there any question of like, hey, Jessica, this is great, but what's it going to do for the business?
Exactly. So for us, like I said earlier, everything we do starts with our goal to make the client experience better. So sometimes you can easily measure ROIs and KPIs. Sometimes it's harder to measure. The client experience is one of those things that it's difficult to put a number on. You can do NPS surveys, you get Google reviews, but truly putting a number on it is difficult. So for this particular item, we had a vast range of individuals on the phone with our clients. We had people who have been in the industry for 10 years, people who have been in the industry for 2 weeks. And what we noticed when we were talking to these individuals is they had very different comfort levels on how to answer client questions, how to speak to potential clients. And for us, that's a red flag because we really pride ourselves on providing a high quality and consistent experience. So we didn't go out looking for a solution that would maybe provide us with a standard ROI. We went to look for something that would actually provide us with a better client experience and a consistent client experience.
Which you can assume is going to positively impact the business, right? You can make some assumptions around that, right?
So the idea would be, that we can start building better referrals. We could, get the Google reviews that help people actually notice us. And also, if your clients feel comfortable with our firm, they're going to work with us better throughout their case to help build the value of their case.
Let's talk about like the individual agents, right? So whether they're there 2 weeks or 2 years, what were some of the the concerns or questions that you were being asked by like those folks on the front line working with your clients about this new technology that you're thinking about bringing in?
We actually had pretty good buy-in from the very new people because they were the ones who were still really in the midst of training. They were still using a paper script. So being able to put like an abstract like agent on their screen didn't feel that different than what they were already doing.
Yeah.
We had a more difficult buy-in process for our experienced agents because they thought they were going to lose their ability to be creative on the phone. So we started this launch with our intake team. And we had some individuals who are some real salespeople, and they pride themselves on sort of their personal brand of doing it. And so they felt like if you put an AI coach there, how can I continue to be my creative self on the phone? Am I going to lose my voice, my brand? And
Yeah.
so that's some of the things we had to work through is like, how do you talk to these individuals about how this product can still help them? And also, how do you make sure that you build the product in such a way that they don't lose the ability to be creative and like lose points on their scorecard or something like that? And so what we ended up actually doing is working with that group to create what we called like the super intake user, where we took all of their creative ideas that helped them sign cases and put them into our playbooks so that they felt like their knowledge and experience was actually valued in
Totally.
such a way that we
Yeah.
wanted to share it with others.
Yeah, I love that. And that, I mean, it's kind of like an ego boost. Like, hey, you're
Yeah.
so awesome. Like, let's take what you know and use it to train the newbies. So, all right, so I like that. Was there any concerns about like not that they're going to lose their voice, but they're being basically monitored and recorded on every call? Were they concerned that do you think there's any concerns that like, ooh, I'm going to get found out doing something I'm not supposed to do?
So there was a little bit of that. So we had already implemented call monitoring through Zoom. So just like that, they knew their calls were already being recorded. So that part wasn't too off. But there was a lot of concern, not necessarily that they would get points taken off for not following a playbook, but for I would say the more non-tangible items like empathy. So they were like, well, what if I speak a certain way, it's not going to pick up that I'm being empathetic, and I am. Or if I get a caller that is particularly escalated and it wasn't my fault and it says that was a negative sentiment. So we had to work through a lot of how we would use the information that we would receive to kind of make people feel more comfortable that they weren't going to be unfairly judged because they happened to get a caller that was escalated when they called us, as opposed to them being the source of the negative sentiment.
So it's funny because I always say like, people ask me all the time like, hey, how accurate is the sentiment score in abstract? And I'll say, well, how my wife sounds angry is very different than how you sound angry, Jessica. And can you tell the difference within 7 seconds of knowing me? No. And so it's used as a baseline, right? Like I think that's important for anybody who's looking to get buy-in in any new technology is we're just leveling up the baseline understanding. And then there's going to be nuances of how things are said and what's said that really become a conversation, right, between a supervisor and a frontline agent. So I think it again, how you guys kind of positioned it is really the best way to do it because the average human can only understand 93% of what's being said to them. And so it's fascinating that a lot of people think, software is going to be 100% when humans have been
Right.
talking for millions of years and we still can't communicate correctly. So, okay, so we got kind of how we communicate. Now we're actually beginning implementation, and agents are seeing things being presented to them, they're being scored, and they don't like it, right? They don't like what they're seeing. How do you overcome that?
Yeah, so that was one of the biggest problems we had, which is everyone was looking at their score and trying to dispute it has to be wrong. I can't possibly be scoring low on empathy, or I can't possibly be scoring low on sentiment. And so we had to spend, nearly daily meetings talking about how we should be looking for ways to improve, how we're not using the system in a punitive way. We're using it purely as a way to help all of us get better. Because I think people immediately think if I get a low score, that's going to result in some type of punitive measure against me at work. And so we had to really work hard to change the way people were thinking about these types of measurements. Because typically KPIs are meant to be you're either meeting them, and if you're not, there's some type of punitive punishment involved. And
Yeah.
for us, that's not how we wanted abstract to be. We wanted it to be something that could make us all better. And we didn't want to use it to make anyone feel worse about themselves. So there was a lot of that. We also started sharing really good calls so that people also felt, really rewarded when they did something particularly well. Right. So as long as you're not just pointing out the negative, but also use it to point out the positive, use it to show people how they can effectively communicate on these calls. I think that also made people feel like we were looking for the positive, not just the negative on these.
It is interesting because there's always the best intentions when you put stuff out, and then how people react to it, whether they're supervisors or frontline folks. Like, it's tough. Like the reality like shows up and you're like, whoa, like maybe I'm do need to improve a little bit there, or maybe I'm not saying that the way I'm supposed to say it. So it's always interesting kind of working through that. Would you have done anything differently looking back on, implementing Abstract or Zoom's recording tool? Any mistakes that you made along the way?
Yes. So I think one of the things, and I had a conversation recently with some of our mid-level managers about we use various AI tools, and the common misconception is that you can plug these in, turn them on, and they're going to just magically fix the problem. They're going to work perfectly, and that never happens. And so when people come into these new implementations with the expectation that turning on this AI tool is going to be perfect from day one and it's going to fix a problem that exists in your organization, they're going to be very disappointed and frustrated. So with Abstract, we had a lot of complaints about 2 months in. They're like, not all of these recommended responses are triggering when I want them to, right? Like, this person was talking to me about how they needed to see a doctor, but I know there's a recommended response about treatment and it didn't pop up. And we were like, well, we didn't actually, the builders of the recommended responses, we didn't actually know how clients were talking about this issue. So we did not have the correct prompt in there. And so it was kind of eye-opening for me in that we don't actually treat our AI tools like we treat a new person, right? If you bring a new individual into your org, you onboard them, you train them, you check in on them, you give them feedback on their work so they get better. You should do the same thing with your AI tools, right? You can't just drop someone in and walk away from their desk and expect them to be an A player. So what we've started doing now, and we had to sort of go back and restart this Abstract rollout, is actually treat it like you're onboarding a new hire and set in constant feedback loops and updates to make sure that you're actually iteratively improving the product, as opposed to just dropping it in and hoping that it fixes something. And so
So
for us, that was the change.
you bring up such a good point, because it's such a valid point, because anything, it takes work, right? It takes work to do things, right? Like, it takes work to improve processes, and everybody in society today is used to like an easy button or an easy pill to accomplish XYZ thing, and you get out of it what you put into it. And so, and the results, I'm not sure if you can share some results, but like, you guys did the work and like the results came, right?
Yep.
And I think we did a customer story with you guys, and the results were amazing, right? And so like, you put in the work and the results will come.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're talking about with the consistency on our intake team in particular is the time it takes to actually get a client signed up and the overall experience. So we started monitoring about 2 years ago now how long it takes us to get that client signed. And we were converting maybe 30% of our clients on the first call with them. Once we implemented Abstract, we've been on your system a little over a year now. We've had a lot more success building out our recommended responses and our playbooks at this point. And we converted about 75% on the first call now. And we're at now an overall conversion rate of 99%. So like, the iterative approach works, right? We didn't see a significant impact in those first 2 months. But once we actually sort of went back and re-rolled out the product, and we kept the feedback loops and we started updating and really playing with it and making sure it was working, we've been able to see significant better conversion rates than we ever saw before.
Which translates into dollars, right? Those
Exactly.
are dollars for the business, right? So looking back, right, we're in a unique situation here where I sold you the software, Jessica.
Yep.
What should I, as the vendor, have better communicated to you so you understood that faster?
So I think the piece that would be most helpful is to constantly revisit what you've built. So what you build during implementation is a great starting point, but you should revise your playbooks and your recommended responses probably at least once a month, if not more frequently than that, through the first probably 1 to 2 quarters. Because that's whenever you're going to get the most, I think, feedback from your team on what's working, what's not working. And they're really heavily invested early in the process. Like they're going to have ideas. And so, like I said, once we did the re-rollout, we set weekly meetings with the team. And we're like, just tell us what you noticed this week. Literally keep a notebook by your desk and just jot it down and get your team invested. Be ready to make frequent updates in the beginning, just so that you can at least, I think, get your information to a better point. And I think, it's just being ready to make the changes and knowing that that's completely acceptable, that you will make constant change.
Yeah, I like that. So just setting the expectation that it's going to be an iterative approach. It's going to take some back and forth collaboration. You mentioned like meeting with the team, right? Like let them feel like they have a say. Let them feel like they're contributing to the success of it. And honestly, if they're telling you like, hey, this is the right way to handle this, you configure it in abstract, and then they don't use it, you can go back to them and be like, well, you told me how you handle this question or this objection. So is there a better way to use it? So that kind of leads me into, the last couple minutes. I always like to do like, recommendations for anybody who's, thinking about pitching to the CEO to then go evaluate vendors, to then kind of fight through the behavior change. Like, what's the one thing that you would do the next time you onboard a new vendor differently than you've done in the past?
I think for us, the big thing is key champions early. So identify those people in your organization that are going to be your power users, and they're going to help you do the iterative approach, right? Like we originally launched Abstract, for example, with our entire intake team. Like I said, we had people that were 2 weeks into their tenure with us, and we've put them on a beta project. I would say choose a few individuals that you can work very closely with, get them really bought into the product, and let them become the champions for the rest of the organization. As opposed to trying to get 20 people on board, you might be able to get 5 people on board, and then they can be opinion leaders for the group. I think for us, that would have been a difference maker, just because it would have been easier to get a few people bought in as opposed to trying to get a whole entire department bought in.
Yeah, I love that. So champions. Okay. What would you never do again?
Ooh. Well, I would never pitch to an entire department.
Okay.
I also say that once you've made the decision, so in our org, typically I make the technology decision and then I pass it to the mid-level manager and walk away. That doesn't work. The person who vetted the solution needs to be just as invested in it. Otherwise, they feel like, someone from higher up is just passing this on to me, and now I have to take this project that I never wanted to be part of.
Yeah.
So for us, it's continuing the decision maker's involvement in the process and not making your mid-level manager feel like now they have to take on this whole technology project that they never actually maybe asked for.
Okay. I like that. So don't step away, right?
Exactly.
If you're gonna lead from the front, right? That whole like picture of the leader in the front as opposed to pushing from behind, right? Lead from the front, right? And I think, if they see, Jessica at the top, buying in, jumping in, every single day, right? Everybody will kind of get on board with that. I love that. Well, I really do appreciate you sharing, some of the hurdles, some of the challenges, how you overcame them, some recommendations, which I think apply to any tool that you're bringing in, whether it's a recording tool, a new phone system, whatever, right? Like I think your strategy that you've talked about is applicable across all those. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Cool. Enjoy the rest of your day, Jessica.